2012, this was the site of a gravel crushing mining operation. Tiger Construction was doing work on the interstate. So behind those cars, we have about 4,600 cubic yards of what's called Class 2 aggregate. Good stuff that they put under the roads before they pave. All right, that's number one. Number two, when we went about thinking about improving forest health, again, a lot of what we were thinking about, what Bob was talking about, is this idea of thinning from below. And so the idea behind that is we want to leave the largest trees there. And then Bob used two terms. He said horizontal fuels and vertical fuels. So horizontal fuels meaning brush and things like that. Vertical fuels meaning trees. So you can see pretty well through the forest. If you look that way, you can see the water. We haven't completely thinned up against the water, but that was the idea behind our resilience and our wildfire prevention. So we have done some commercial logging. It was primarily in this area, a little bit on the other side, and then there's a small 1 acre, 1.5 acre patch. So you could say it was probably somewhere in the ballpark of about 40 acres of the 670 plus acres that we own. That again was primarily because we're close to a residential subdivision on the west over here. We have this infrastructure, PG&E lines, all kind of infrastructure flowing through this site. And so we said, as we get closer to other human disturbances, we want to thin it out a little bit more to reduce fire risk. So that's number one. The second thing is, as we were thinning it out, we did sell some logs. We hired a logger out of Forest Hill, which is a little bit further down. And he has a good relationship with a company called Sierra Pacific, which is, I don't know if it's the largest or the second largest landowner in the state. Thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of timberland, probably hundreds of thousands of acres that they own. So they have a mill in Lincoln. So we were milling and we were shipping it down to Sierra Pacific, losing money selling logs because the cost to log it was so much higher than the cost than what they were paying. And so we happened to stumble on a couple of other grants, and we said, you know what? Way back when, we had a stack of logs that was probably 30 feet high, all the way across. We said, you know what? We want to build a nature center in this area. We want to build accommodations in this area. We want to create, basically, Gateway Park, as we call it. And so a part of what we did is we said, you know what? We should have it milled on site. And so we put out kind of a broad outreach to a bunch of mobile millers. And we got all kind of wild pricing. And then finally somebody said, we'll mill it for you for 75 cents a board foot. All right. So what we did is, thank God for ChatGPT. We said, all right, how many board feet in a 2x4 that's 10 feet long, right? We started doing these measurements because we needed a reference. We didn't know whether 75 cents was good or not. And so it was just above Home Depot prices. So we said, okay, we'll do it. And so what you're looking at over there is hopefully the lumber that we will use to construct the nature center and some of the other facilities that we envision for this park. We envision the active areas of the park being from the Kinder Morgan oil and gas pipeline, which you will see as a part of this tour, going forward all the way to the freeway. And then once we get south or past the Kinder Morgan pipeline, we envision the rest of that area just being wilderness that's really dedicated to preserving habitat for wildlife, having the native trails on there that we will be driving on, and really just being a peaceful place where you transition from big timber trees like these to what we call oak woodlands or oak trees, mountain oak trees, effectively, to areas where it's chaparral grass. So we're going to have a variety of different landscapes. We have some phenomenal people who are helping to bring those landscapes to fruition. So I'm going to call up Chuck Hughes, who is our lead biologist, to introduce himself, talk a little bit about the work we've done so far, some of the stuff we have on the horizon. And the big thing that we've been thinking about a lot is we've been saying we need a way to objectively measure our impact. We got the land, and the land was in this state where between the railroads and the industrial logging companies and just the natural stuff that we see at this site, it's just jacked up. It's just a jacked up site. People are asking about this van here. This is one of many abandoned vehicles that are scattered throughout this property. You see all the bullet holes in it. Somebody's using it for target practice or whatever the case may be. And so that's a part of the restoration effort that we're undertaking as well. But Chuck, I'll let you touch on some.
My name's Chuck Hughes. I'm with Environmental Science Associates. We're working with 40 Acre League on initial planning of the project and leading into an application to the county and all the resource agencies that are also involved. I just wanted to mention that normally projects do their technical reports and surveys. They put it off as long as they can, and 40 Acre League has been really proactive with doing it earlier in the process, treating it not so much as something they need to do to comply, but something that they can do to really inform the project design so that they can have a project that works much better with trying to restore the habitat and make it much better for wildlife, plants, and fire safety, of course. They've done special status plant surveys. There have been
break that down. Half the people in there don't know what that means.
so different plants in California have different status under the law, right? And some are common plants, and some have to be considered when you go through a project approval, and that's a special status plant. So they've done surveys to determine if there are any special status plants on the land. They've done surveys for pollinators, bees, and all the other type of pollinating insects, surveys for the fish in the lake, and these kinds of surveys to inform the project design. And I really can't say enough about what a good job 40 Acre League has done working with the forester to open up what was really a really dense and overgrown forest, because when those trees are thinned out like firewood naturally, if you had a natural fire regime on the landscape, and that sunlight's able to get down to the soil again in between the trees, you really have a much better and healthier forest, and you have a much higher diversity of plants that are able to move in and grow in that forest understory. When the trees get really thick, if you drive by on the freeway, you'll see some really thick forests. It's all shaded down on that understory, and there's really nothing growing there. And that fuel just accumulates down in there. It's a big safety fire hazard, and it's really not good for forest health, and it's not good for all of the diversity. Daryl mentioned that we're developing metrics that can be used to measure that forest health, both before and after the project is eventually finished. And some of those are things that emphasize, really take into account the non-native invasive plants and put a higher emphasis on the native ones that the local pollinators evolved with. And also some stuff along the lakeshore. We're working with 40 Acre to improve the habitat for amphibians that live along the lakeshore, and also some metrics that have been developed by actually San Francisco Estuary Institute. It's called the California Rapid Assessment Method, and it puts a metric score on the habitat of different waters and wetlands. And we're talking to 40 Acre League about using that along the lakeshore, and that will inform not just what can be done to improve the habitat overall, but how that can be demonstrated both before and after the project is developed, that there's been a lift in that habitat for the wildlife.
Perfect.
Daryl, is there anything else?
Nope, that's it. Let's give a round of applause for Mr. Hughes. All right, we got a couple more people real quick. Search.
I love that, Daryl. I love it. I'm Scott Black. I'm Executive Director of the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. We, as Daryl says, are the pollinator people. We do more than that. We work on all of the different important insect groups. Insects, as Daryl talks about, we want to see them, but insects drive systems. You won't have birds without insects. You won't have these salamanders without insects. You won't have healthy soils without insects. You won't have pollination without the pollinators. So when Daryl told us about this project and invited us to partner, we were really, really delighted to do that. We do projects all over California and actually all over the United States. And I think what they're doing here, and I really appreciate your surveys and the forestry that they've done, because although we've been talking about some pollinator plantings, which we can maximize some habitat in some areas, what's just as important is the landscape as a whole. And the thinning that's been done, and leaving of diverse trees, and even we talked a little bit about brush piles. They're important for a lot of animals, including bumblebees and butterflies. Bumblebees nest in them, overwinter in them. Butterflies will overwinter in them as well. We don't want to leave all the brush piles, but leaving some of that, stuff around is really good for these animals. So we're just delighted to be here, and we're delighted that Daryl and the team, the 40 Acre League team, are thinking broadly. They're thinking people, they're thinking nature.